Everyone enjoying this warm weather? I love it. It's my kind of weather. I want if I want winter to be winter. I don't necessarily want summer to be summer all the time, but um, I just like it. All right, let's get started with a word of prayer, and we'll get into class. Dear God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the many blessings you give us, and we thank you for the freedom and opportunity we have to come and worship you and to learn about your word. Lord, I ask that you continue to bless us as we continue this class studying your life and your ministry and how you lived it and how you were with others. And I ask that we take what we've learned here and use it to mimic how you were with others and be the same way out in the world. And that's in Christ we pray. Amen. All right. So hopefully, or maybe more than hopefully, prayerfully, this last round of COVID wave is one of the last ones we'll experience. I'm hoping. I think everyone we know had some sort of illness or sickness in the last 2 weeks, whether it was a cold, a cough, worse than that, something. So glad to be able to get back and glad to see a lot of people back and definitely see people feeling better. So we were going to continue on in this series, recognizing Jesus. I believe this is lesson 12 or 13 in this series that we have here. And we're just going to keep on going through it. We're still in, Jesus is still ministering in Galilee. It's still a little bit longer before he gets out of the Galilean area. But now we're going to get into Jesus calming the storm. And I know this is one of the bigger ones we were taught when we're children and go through it. So it's not something we're not very familiar with, but we're going to go through it and kind of look at some of the details as we go through this. I think on this one, I don't know. We'll see. I may read Matthew and Mark. I'm not going to read all of them, but we'll definitely do Matthew and Mark on this one. So Matthew 8, verses 23 through 27. Then Jesus got into the boat and started across the lake with his disciples. Suddenly a fierce storm struck the lake, with waves breaking into the boat, but Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him up, shouting, "Lord, save us, we're going to drown." Jesus responded, "Why are you afraid? You have so little faith." Then he got up and rebuked the wind and waves, and suddenly there was a great calm. The disciples were amazed. "Who is this man?" they asked. "Even the winds and waves obey him." As evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, this is Mark 4, 35 to 41. As evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake." So they took Jesus in the boat and started out, leaving the crowds behind. All those other boats followed. But soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat, and it began to fill with water. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. The disciples woke him up, shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown?" When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Silence, be still." Suddenly the wind stopped, and there was a great calm. Then he asked them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" The disciples were absolutely terrified. "Who is this man?" they asked each other. "Even the wind and waves obey him." And I'm not going to go through Luke because it's very, very similar. But if we look here at the boat, I'll start off with the boat, and then we'll look at the Sea of Galilee. If we look at the boat that was used here, it was one that most of the people in that time would have been very familiar with. It says here, Josephus talked about, he wrote that there was usually more than 300 fishing boats on the Sea of Galilee at once. And they weren't like a rowboat, right? I mean, it wasn't a small little John boat because it had 12 people and Jesus on it. But it was big enough to where they could live off of it. They could, had enough room for their nets, for their the room to sleep, and room to, obviously they would cast nets. When they fished, they would cast nets over the side and then and pull things up. So, and it usually had most of the boats would have oars and sails at the same time. They would use the sails most of the time, but in a storm like this, they obviously would have drawn the sails in, because it would have not only tore the sails to pieces, but at the same time it would have just threw the boat all over the place, because the when a storm like this comes. You've seen storms here when they come. The winds just come from all sorts of directions. So that was kind of to give you an idea of what kind of boat they were on. So it wasn't a little tiny boat, but it wasn't just a massive, huge boat. It was just your average sized fishing boat for that day. Now, to give you an idea, the Sea of Galilee, it's an unusual body of water. It's about, when you think of a sea, it would be more of a long lake or a big lake, and I think Mark and Luke actually refer to it as a lake in their writings. But it was 13 miles long and 7 miles wide. I'm trying to think of what size lake that would be around here. I don't know. I don't know if we really have any that's that big in this area. But anyways, I mean, it was so it kind of gives you a general idea of how big that is. But here's the thing: it's 150 to 200 feet deep. So that is a deep. If anyone knows anything about lakes, that is a deep lake. I think your average lake's around 30 to 40. I think, is it this one here? I think it's like 50. I forget the name of this little pond now, or Dykes Pond. I was reading on we were over at Lake Dogs the other day, and they've got some depth analysis stuff of some of them, but I think that one's actually deeper than the other lakes out here. And so 150, 200 feet is very deep for a lake, and the shoreline is 680 feet below sea level. So it's actually, if you're looking at, you're pretty far under sea level compared to where everything is. So it's an interesting layout. They said sudden storms will appear over the surrounding mountains with little warning, stirring the water, and they said up to 20-foot waves. So you can imagine being out on a good-sized lake, and then all of a sudden a storm coming up and 20-foot waves hitting your fishing boat. Now that's like being out in the ocean. You got having 20-foot waves. So they were caught off guard. These were experienced fishermen. These were not people who had never spent a lot of time in a boat. So they understood the dangers, and that's why they were afraid. They understood what they were in the middle of, and so that's why they were afraid. But the thing they didn't know, and I, from this point up to this point, it looks like, and this is I think why the disciples were so afraid after he did this, is up to this point he's only done miracles that have really affected the body, the mind, the one with turning water into wine, but he's never really controlled the elements, right? I mean, he's not done anything where he's caused lightning to come down or done anything like we see in some of your people in some of your sci-fi stuff with people with special abilities where they can control weather or all that kind of stuff. They haven't seen this yet, and so I mean, you can imagine. The only thing I can kind of describe it to is being in the middle of something like almost a hurricane or that's like the severe thunderstorms that we get around here. I mean, some of them things will come through and you'll get 50, 60 mile an hour wind gusts, maybe bigger than that, heavy rains. And so you can imagine if you're in the middle of a South Georgia thunderstorm, and then all of a sudden someone just walks out and says, "Peace, be still," and everything just clears up. I think I'd be a little afraid too. So this is the experience they had is, they're on this fishing boat. They're experienced fishermen, and Jesus is, I like Matthew's, or was it Mark's account, he's in the back with a cushion just asleep. And I wonder how in the world anyone can sleep in the middle of that. It's like, how in the world? But one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not like it was a cruise ship that just kind of swayed, and I mean that thing would have been just rocking all over the place. And so maybe that gives you an idea of how tired Jesus was and how much work he'd been doing. But either way, I mean, obviously he was using this as a learning and training opportunity for them as well. They go and wake him up, and they're like, "Don't you care about us? We're about to die." And he's just like, "All right, that's enough. Calm down." And it does, and it just disappears. And I would have loved to have seen the expression on most of them, their face, because they were scared. I think at this point, they were more scared of what Jesus just did in the storm they were in, because it was just something, those were not things that, it's not something that happens. It's not, you don't just go in and tell the weather to be quiet and the weather be quiet. So, the last note I put on there is when caught in the storms of life, it's easy to think that God has lost control and that we're at the mercy of the winds of fate. In reality, God is sovereign. He controls the history of the world as well as our personal destinies. Just as Jesus calmed the waves, he can calm whatever storm you may face. And I think that's there's a faith issue here too, but there's also the story or the meaning that goes along with this is, in this world we're always going to we're not always going to be in, but everyone's going to experience storms in their life, whether it's sickness, whether it's something financial, whether it's job related, whether it's whatever. You're going to experience some sort of storm in your life. And the thing is you've got to remember who's there with you as you go through the storm. And in the end, Jesus is going to be able to calm that storm. I don't think any of us in here's, their entire life's been a storm and uncontrolled. There's been some people who've had rough lives. I'm not going to discredit that. But as long as Jesus is in there, you can face these storms and make it through. Steve, are you going to?
Everybody's going to experience it.
Yeah.
Everybody, not maybe. It's going to happen. Things are going to happen in your life.
Yep. I mean, you're going to.
Things are going to come up that you're like, what the heck?
Yep.
And just other things just out of the blue, and you're like.
Yep. Some people may never experience a financial hardship their entire life, but I can guarantee you, in your lifetime, you're going to experience some sort of health issue. I don't know anyone in the end that doesn't die, right? I mean, so there's going to be some health, and like I said, some people have it harder than others for whatever reason. Some of it's choice, some of it's things that you can't control, you're born into, or things that happen to you can't control. But in the end, no matter what each individual person is going through, if you got Jesus there with you, it's going to make a huge. And the thing is it may not always the storm may not always come to, like in this situation, a peaceful calm. You may go through a storm for many, many years, but can you imagine going through a storm without Jesus being there? And so that's the message I think to look at here is we've got to learn to face the storms in our lives with Jesus by our side and put our faith in him through it, and that's going to make the storm a whole lot more calm than what it would have been if you don't have Jesus in there. Yep.
Have you abandoned me? Even some of the Psalms of despair in the Old Testament would write about that. It's human nature to do that, and that's where Jesus said you've got to have that faith that you just hang in there. I'm going to get you through this, and like you say, we want the storm calmed immediately, and Jesus sometimes sees it differently, and he lets us go through the storm so we can be strengthened, and our faith can be made stronger.
Yep.
And but man, when you're going through it, it's tough.
Well, you think about that. I mean, you talk about the Psalm, and David wrote some of the most depressing, the Psalms out there, and he was a man after God's own heart. And so, I mean, like you said, that is human nature to have that reaction when going through a terrible time. Yeah. That shows the human side of Jesus, and that's why I kind of made that comment. Is he was going, and this is one thing I want to know, and we're going to look at a little bit this here in a minute. But I think the actual physical act of healing people was draining on Jesus, and we're going to was physically draining. We'll see why here in a minute, why I think that. And this is Chad's opinion; it's not a biblical fact, but I think going through that process was draining as well. I don't know. Go ahead. Yep. Yeah, we're going to go over that. Yep. So I think that was draining as well, because the way to look at that is him being 100% God, 100% human. He had to get tired. He couldn't just not get tired, and so all that was not only mentally, but I think physically draining on him, and that's why I think he was able to sleep through an entire storm. Have you ever been so tired that crash out, and all you doubt nothing could wake you. So, all right, any more comments on that one? All right, so now this is one of my favorite stories. Jesus sends demons into a herd of pigs. I think I'm going to just do Mark on this one, Mark 5, 1 through 20. So they arrived at the other side of the lake in the region of, oh man, I meant to look that up on the pronunciation. Yep, what Dad said. Gerasenes or something like that. When Jesus climbed out of the boat, a man possessed by an evil spirit came out from the tomb to meet him. This man lived in the burial caves and could no longer be restrained even with a chain. Whenever he was put into chains and shackles, as he often was, he snapped the chains from his wrists and smashed the shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Day and night he wandered among the burial caves in the hills, howling and cutting himself with the sharp stones. When Jesus was still some distance away, the man saw him, ran to meet him, and bowed low before him. With a shriek he screamed, "Why are you interfering with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In the name of God, I beg you, don't torture me." For Jesus had already said to the spirit, "Come out of the man, you evil spirit." Then Jesus demanded, "What is your name?" And he replied, "My name is Legion, because there are many of us inside this man." Then the evil spirits begged him again and again not to send them to some distant place. There happened to be a large herd of pigs feeding on the hillside nearby. "Send us into those pigs," the spirit begged. "Let us enter them." So Jesus gave them permission. The evil spirits came out of the man and entered the pigs, and the entire herd of about 2,000 pigs plunged down the steep hillside into the lake and drowned in the water. The herdsmen fled to the nearby town and the surrounding countryside, spreading the news as they ran. People rushed out to see what had happened. A crowd soon gathered around Jesus, and they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons. He was sitting there fully clothed and perfectly sane, and they were all afraid. Then those who had seen what had happened told the others about the demon-possessed man and the pigs, and the crowd began pleading with Jesus to go away and leave them alone. And as Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. But Jesus said, "No, go home to your family and tell them everything the Lord has done for you and how merciful he has been." So the man started off to visit the 10 towns of the region and began to proclaim the great things Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed at what he had told them. So let's start going through the notes on this one. This region is located on the southeast side, and I had the map up there. I probably should have done it for this one in the beginning of class. But it was on the southeast side of the Sea of Galilee. So you had the Sea of Galilee here, and it was in this region over here. And we talked about the 10 towns in our first couple lessons when we talked about the Galilean region. This was one of the more important cities of the region. Each one had individual governments, and they were mostly inhabited by Gentiles. So that's why, a lot of things, well, why would there be pigs in this area? Because Jews would not have had pigs. They weren't allowed to touch them, come in contact with them, anything. And so this is why there were a herd of pigs in this area, because this was a Gentile area and they didn't observe the Jewish customs. Demon-possessed people are under the control of one or more demons. Demons being fallen angels who joined Satan in his rebellion against God and are now evil spirit under Satan's control. We're going to talk a little bit. I'm not going to dive deep into demonology here in this particular. Maybe I'll do a class on it one of these days because there's a lot of unknown. I'll talk about this a little bit more, but there's a lot of unknown. So we'll look at that, but I'm not going to get into the deep details of demonology. But one of the interesting things is Matthew says there were 2 demon-possessed men, and Mark and Luke only refer to the man who spoke. So most scholars believe there were 2 of them. Matthew talks about there being 2. Mark and Luke only mention the guy who actually spoke, because that was the guy who had interaction with Jesus. So here's a lot of people say, well, look, that's and again, where the Bible doesn't, it conflicts itself. You got 2 on one story, and you got 1 on another, and then, like most scholars say, more than likely there were 2, and Matthew or Mark and Luke just didn't mention them in their stories. According to the Jewish ceremonial laws, and this kind of goes along with the pigs thing too, the men that were encountered were unclean in three ways. One, they were Gentiles, so they weren't Jews, so they were unclean because of that. Two, they were demon-possessed. And three, they were living in a cemetery. So you had these, and this is that same pattern, and I'm going to try to bring this out every time we see this. This is that same pattern of Jesus going and helping people who the Jews at that time would not have helped. They wouldn't have had any contact with this man. They wouldn't have touched this man. More than likely, they wouldn't even talk to him. And so again, this is Jesus. This guy or these guys run up to Jesus because they know who he is. The demons know who he is immediately and recognize him. But Jesus helped them anyways. And in the note I put in here is we should not turn our backs on people who we consider unclean, right, in this day and age, whatever, the terminology you want to use, or repulsive to us, or who violate our moral standards or religious beliefs. A lot of times our reaction to people who don't live like us is a form of disgust, almost, sometimes. It's like, oh, I can't believe that person does that, or I can't believe so-and-so is like that, or I can't believe these people are like that. And Jesus never had that attitude. He always went to those who were considered the unclean, and we're going to look at this again with the lady that was bleeding. He would always approach them with care and love and mercy. He didn't condone anything that, some of these were, they couldn't help, but others were. The woman at the well, she could control the lifestyle that she had lived. But he never once just comes right out and attacks them for the way they're living or the situation that they're in. He offers them a way out of it. He always offered them a way out. Sometimes he asked them, before offering or giving them a way out, he would ask them if they wanted to. But he always approached it with grace and love and mercy, and never with judgment or condemnation or ridicule or any form of what I would call belittling when he came across these people. I mean, he could have been like, "Oh, you're a demon-possessed man. I'm Jesus. Get away from me," but he didn't do that. And so we need to make sure that we copy. Go ahead.
Even with the demons,
Mm-hmm.
they begged him not to send them out. One verse said into the abyss, which means outer darkness somewhere.
Yep.
And he even gave the demons their request. He was that merciful,
Yeah.
that he wouldn't do that.
Think about it. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. He showed, I guess, in my sense, the way I see it, compassion to the fallen angels of heaven. They knew their fate, and we're going to look at this. So, then this is the next point. The Bible tells us at the end of the world, the devil and his angels will be thrown in the lake of fire. You can see that in Revelation 20:10. When the demons asked Jesus they asked, had their time come to torture them, or had he come to torture them before God's appointed time? They know their ultimate fate. They know where they're going to end up, and they were asking, they know at the end of the world where they're going to go, and they were asking Jesus, did you come to do this before it's supposed to happen? They were fearful that Jesus was going to torture them, and we'll see this. Jesus' dad mentioned it a little bit here. I kind of skipped down. Well, actually, maybe I don't have a note on that one. I think I just had that one in mind. If they ask, are you going to, don't send us into, Dad says the abyss. I think this one says the unknown. I forget what some translations say. Outer darkness. But they know in the end they're going to be sent to hell. And they're going to be tortured for and I think some of the verses say fire and brimstone and stuff like that. So they knew they did not want Jesus to send them to. A lot of scholars do believe that he could have sent them to hell ahead of time if he wanted to.
Even as Christians, we forget that Satan and his demons are going to be tortured.
Mm-hmm.
In the cartoons, you see like Satan and he's torturing people, but it's going to be all of them being
Yep.
tortured. It's not going to be Satan's realm.
And I heard and this is just this is a complete side note, but Robbie mentioned this, reminded me of it. Because a lot of times you'll say, well, Satan and the demons, they know, the fallen angels, they know their fate. And they say, well, the reason they tempt us is to have as many people to join them whenever they go to hell, right? I heard a good scholar one time, or I read on a scholar talk about, he says he doesn't believe that's true. He doesn't believe Satan is trying to tempt us to have as many people there with them. The reason that Satan, he believes, tempts us and tries to get as many people to hell, because he knows for every single person that he can get to hell, that's a pain or causes pain to the heart of God. And I thought about that for a minute. I said, that makes a lot more sense. Jesus or Satan doesn't really care about our souls, right? What Satan, if you look at Satan's act, his entire act, and that we see in the Bible, everything that he does, is to punish or to cause pain to God, or try to cause pain to God. And I like that, because he said, well, the scholar said, well, we like to make things about ourselves a lot of times. And I do believe that Satan wants as many people in hell with him as he can possibly get. But I think the ultimate goal isn't to just, come after us. It's to cause as much pain and heartache to Jesus and God as he possibly can before he ends up in his final destination. And I thought about that, and I said, that makes a lot of sense. Because for every person that goes to hell, that is going to be painful for God. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yep. 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 And so, anyways, that's kind of going down a side note. So the next point here is they asked Jesus, like, we need you to leave, right? You just healed this man, threw all these demons out into a bunch of pigs, and now all of our pigs are dead. We want you to leave. We don't want you here. And so there was a couple reasons for that. One, unlike their pagan gods, Jesus could not be contained, controlled, or appeased. Right? They couldn't control Jesus. They can control in their sense, their pagan gods, because they, one, had made them up, but two, and they weren't real, but there was a control factor in what their gods could do. There was no control in Jesus. I mean, they saw that Jesus come down and said, the demons themselves had to ask permission from Jesus to leave the man and go somewhere else. And so that kind of gives you the example of how powerful he was. They feared Jesus' supernatural power, something they had never seen before. And then they were upset about losing a herd of pigs. Obviously, this is their livelihood. That's 2,000 pigs. That was a lot of money. That's a lot of money now. That was a lot of money back then. That was a lot of people's livelihood and food, and so he had destroyed, half their, who knows, they had destroyed the entire herd of pigs. And so there was a lot of things there. And so I put a note on there, what are we more concerned about? With Jesus and the things that he does, or the things that we should be doing sometimes, are we afraid of some of the results of following Jesus, or living like Jesus, or being like Jesus? And one of those I put here, are we more concerned about property programs, politics? You can put a list on profit, right? Than we are people. Because I can tell you, I've witnessed it myself, where entire congregations have refused to change, or to look at things new, or to do things because they wanted to hold on to their traditions. That their traditions are more important than reaching new people. I've seen Christians who, with things I've seen so stubborn sometimes, and this isn't just Christianity, this is the human nature a lot of times, where they know they're wrong. They know they should change. They know they should do something different, but they're so stuck in what they have, or their profit, or their money, or the prestige, or their whatever you want to tag in there, that they refuse to give that up and do what's right to follow more people. And we see this a lot. And I don't know. It's a hard thing to battle sometimes, because we do get stuck in our ways. We get we allow fear, and this is the biggest thing. I think we allow fear more than anything to control and keep us from doing things that we should be doing. And we see this two examples of this, fear from the disciples themselves when they're in the middle of a storm. And then, the fear of these people, they're so afraid of the Savior, someone who could come and save them, that they ask him to leave because of him healing a man and getting demons to go out. So we need to make sure we don't fall in it. And that last note I put in there is human beings are created in God's image and have eternal value. How foolish and yet how easy it is to value possessions, investments, and even animals above human life. Go ahead.
But seriously, Jesus taught along these lines that if you gave up anything to follow him, he's gonna give it back to you tenfold.
Yeah.
And that, as he told the rich young ruler, you go and sell everything you have, come follow me, you have treasure in heaven. So regardless of what physical or material or monetary thing you have to give up to follow Jesus, it's going to be, it's like the pearl of great price. It's going to be worth selling all that you have in order to get that one pearl of great price. And this is what these people didn't understand. They saw their immediate profit go down the drain or over into the ocean, basically.
Yep.
They didn't see the big picture that, hey, come follow Christ and you're going to be enriched in all kinds of ways.
Yeah. And we miss it. We miss the, what's the terminology? We miss the forest for the trees or something like that. I forget how that, but we miss the big thing there because of some of the things that we fear. Getting into the demons just a little bit here. The evil spirit's name was Legion. A legion was the largest unit of Roman in the Roman army. It consisted of 3,000 to 6,000 soldiers. So a lot of scholars believe that there were at least 3,000 demons in this man. Now, it could not have been that many. It may have just been legion, and he meant many. We don't know for sure. It doesn't say. But theoretically, if we look, the fact that he sent them into 2,000 pigs, so there was probably at least 2,000 demons in this man. And so I couldn't imagine the torture of what that would have been like. Got one or two personalities, having 2,000 or 3,000 personalities in your head be quite torturous. So one of the notes I put in here, and again, like I said, I'm not going to dive deep into this because it's a whole study on itself, and I like this kind of stuff. It's like what I consider more science fiction type side, the sci-fi side of things. Although we cannot be sure why demon possession occurs, we know that evil spirits can use the human body to distort and destroy a person's relationship with God and likeness to him. Even today, demons are dangerous, powerful, and destructive. And that's kind of where I'm going to put that, because there are some people who believe today that demon possession does not occur. There's people today who believe it does. And again, I know where I lay on that, but I'm not. This class isn't the time to go deep into that. But I do believe, whether you believe in demon possession or not, the devil and his demons do work today to distort and to influence and I believe, can have a very strong influence on people's minds. So I think we see then, I think the Bible talks about that, how the devil himself is going around looking for people to destroy. So. And then lastly, Jesus told this man to tell his friends about the miraculous healing. Now, how is that different from all the other times? Yep. Yep, that's true. What's also the other opposite thing, Steve?
Most of the time, he told them to be quiet.
Most of the time, he said, don't say anything about this.
Yep, don't tell anybody, just be happy with what
Be happy. This is the first time where he actually tells someone to actually go and tell them. Diane?
I was going to say he's living in the catacombs because he was so scary and he had ripped shackles and chains out of the walls.
Yeah.
Everybody in the community knew him. Not only was he medically ostracized socially, he was not
Yeah, he was living in a graveyard.
So now they knew this guy.
Yep.
And where he had been living for so long, he enters back into society completely healed. That was a huge testimony.
Yep. And so I put 3 notes, but yeah, it would have been a huge testimony. And I put 3 notes here. One, I think Jesus saw this as an opportunity. They didn't want Jesus there. So Jesus said, well, who's a better witness that, if not me, like Diane just talked about, than this man? Everyone would have known about it. I mean, if you got a guy you're tying up with chains and shackles and he's breaking them, everyone's going to know about that. That's going to be something people are going to probably want to see. Hey, look what this guy did. And so he knew he'd be an effective witness to those because of his previous condition, and he could attest to, hey, look, this is what I like. Y'all saw what I was like, and now look at me. Jesus wanted to expand his ministry by introducing his message to the Gentile area. So this was an opportunity. Like I said, this was the 10 towns, the 10 cities area. There was a large area. This was an opportunity for Jesus to continue to spread his message without having to actually be in this whole area the whole time and could go other areas. And then thirdly, Jesus knew that the Gentiles, since they were not expecting a Messiah, would not try to divert his ministry to trying to crown him a king. That's one of the big things that a lot of the scholars believe, is that the reason Jesus told them not to tell people is, one, he wasn't ready for his ministry to get to the point that it was getting to yet, but also he knew the Jews were going to try it, that their idea was to make him a king, and that's not what he wanted. He wasn't there to be an earthly king. And so he didn't have to worry about that with the Gentiles, because they weren't expecting some triumphant entry, some guy to come back and rule. They weren't expecting anything, so they were more accepting to this side of the message that they have here. All right, anyone else on that one real quick? I don't know if I'm going to get to these last 2, but we'll try. All right, so Jesus heals a bleeding woman and restores a girl to life. Again, on this one, I think I'm going to do Mark on this one as well. So Mark 5:21 through 43. Jesus got in the boat again and went back to the other side of the lake, where a large crowd gathered around him on the shore. Then a leader of the local synagogue, whose name was Jairus, arrived. When he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet, pleading fervently with him. "My little daughter is dying," he said. "Please come and lay your hands on her, heal her so she can live." Jesus went with him, and all the people followed, crowding around him. A woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She had suffered a great deal from many doctors, and over the years she had spent everything she had to pay them, and she had gotten no better. In fact, she had gotten worse. She heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his robe, for she thought to herself, if I can just touch his robe, I will be healed. Immediately the bleeding stopped, and she could feel in her body that she had been healed of her terrible condition. Jesus realized at once that healing power had gone out from him, so he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my robe?" His disciples said to him, "Look at the crowd pressing around you. How can you ask who touched me?" But he kept on looking around to see who had done it. Then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, came and fell to her knees in front of him and told him what she had done. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over." While he was still speaking to her, messengers arrived from the home of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue. They told him, "Your daughter is dead. There's no use troubling the teacher now." But Jesus overheard them and said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just have faith." It's a simple sentence, but a powerful one. Then Jesus stopped the crowd and wouldn't let anyone go with him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw much commotion and weeping and wailing. He went inside and asked, "Why all the commotion and the weeping? The child isn't dead, she's only asleep." The crowd laughed at him, but he made them all leave, and he took the girl's father and mother and his 3 disciples into the room where the girl was laying. Holding her hand, he said to her, and I'm going to try to pronounce Talitha Kahum, which means little girl, get up. And the girl, who was 12 years old, immediately stood up and walked around. They were overwhelmed and totally amazed. Jesus gave them strict orders not to tell anyone what had happened, and then he told them to give her something to eat. That's a little bit longer story, and I like Mark's version. It goes into a little bit more detail there. But the first thing to look at here is this: Jairus was an elected leader of the local synagogue. He was responsible for the supervising the worship, running the weekly school, and caring for the building. Many synagogue leaders had close ties to the Pharisees. Most of them did. And so it's likely that some synagogue rulers had been pressured not to support Jesus. And there would have been a lot of pressure, probably on all of them, not to show any support to Jesus. So for Jairus to come to him and to show, to bow, to lower himself in front of him and show him the respect that he did would have been out of character for most synagogue leaders. But my thing is here, and any of us who have children, if your child is dying, you're going to do what you have to do to get that child. You're going to forget about the politics of the time, and you can say, hey, this man is healing people. He can heal my daughter. And so he forgets all that, and he goes to Jesus and asks for him to get him. So they're going, in the story, he's going back to Jairus' house, and then there's obviously a huge crowd around him. And in that time, by this point in Jesus' ministry, anywhere Jesus went, there was a huge crowd. And that's why he was always trying to get away. And so this woman who had suffered for 12 years of bleeding, they say more than likely it was some type of either menstrual or uterine disorder that was causing her to bleed like this constantly for 12 years. All she does is touch Jesus' robe. And Jesus suddenly, this is what we were talking about, Jesus feels the healing power go out of him. So there's a physical, when Jesus heals people, there's a physical act there. There's something physical inside of Jesus that happens. We don't know what that is, but we know that. And that's why I say I think that healing people for Jesus was draining and tiring, because there was something physical that happened to his human body when he healed people. And so this woman's is healed just from touching. Her faith healed this woman. Jesus' power, but it was her faith that all I've got to do is touch his robe, because a ton of other people had touched Jesus' robe and nothing happened to them, right? I mean, he's going through a crowd, and the disciples kind of mock him a little bit, like, how are you going to ask who touched you, right? Or you're in a massive crowd. And so this, again, is one of those situations where she's considered one of the untouchables. She's unclean. She would have been a social outcast. No one would have wanted to do anything to do with her. And so Jesus again interferes in her life, and she's able. He didn't ask. All he asked was who touched him. He just wanted to know. Now the point I made down here, certainly Jesus knew who touched him. He knew, but I think he wanted to use her as an example of great faith and other to show. Look, I didn't even have to go to this woman and her ask for. All she had to do was have belief that if she touched me or my clothing, that she'd be healed. And she was. And so that's the kind of faith that Jesus is looking for in people. That's a blind faith. I mean, that is a, I'm just going to take my chances and hopefully I can touch him. I know this man has healed so many people. If I just touch him, he's going to heal me. That's going beyond even what Jesus would typically do. So for the people to see this, it's interesting. So, and I didn't put a lot of notes on Jesus going to Jairus' house, because we've kind of see this played over and over again with people not believing. And I like Jesus. I swear Jesus has to have a pretty good sense of humor, because some of the things he says, to people's like, obviously the daughter's just died, and he's like, well, why are y'all crying? She's not dead, she's asleep. And so he goes in and heals her and stuff like that. And so, then the same thing with the who touched me. And it's like, you're in a crowd of a massive amount of people, and you want to know, even the disciples are like, well, why are you asking a dumb question like that? There's a bunch of people around you who touched you. So, but Jesus uses these to again show his power, show this woman's faith. And I'll continue to go back to the treating people the way Jesus treated people, because she was unclean and she touched him, and he could have been like, how dare you touch me being who you are? And that would have been okay. But the Jewish people would have loved, the Jewish leaders would have loved that if Jesus would have rebuked her for touching him. But he showed her love and compassion. Yeah, that's a good point. She was not to be around people at all. She was an outcast. All right, and the last one, and I'm going to try to read this one as quickly as I can, and then we'll go through. I'm at the end. Read this one, and pay attention to the 4 points for the Pharisees. This can be your homework. This is a small section of Jesus heals the blind and the mute, and pay special attention to the Pharisees at their end and their reaction. But next week we're going to look at Jesus being rejected at Nazareth, him urging the disciples to pray for workers, and then him finally sending out the 12. We're getting to the point now where he's actually sending out the 12 disciples, and then Jesus starts to prepare the disciples. This is the part in the ministry, too, where Jesus starts to prepare them for what's going to happen to him. So we'll look at that next week. Thank you.